All right. Well, hello, Ronak. Thanks for joining us on Casual Space.
Hey, good morning, Beth. Yeah, it's really exciting to be here and talking with you today.
Yeah, coming to us live from Johnson Space Center in Texas.
That's right. I'm cooped up here in my office, so happy to talk with you today.
It's a great office. And tell me, is the weather still sweating from the point you get into the car to the walking in the front door?
Unfortunately, it is. Yeah, I think we're still highs in the 80s right now. So
Oh, that's not terrible. Oh my, for
yeah,
October. See, you've got to come visit us in the Midwest where it's a beautiful 70 and the colors and the crisp morning air, but we'll be visiting you come February, I promise.
yeah, the weather will be a little better then. Yeah, I got lucky enough to spend a few weeks here in the Midwest over the past month, so I got my 2 weeks dose of fall while I was
Awesome.
up there.
So where are you from originally?
So I grew up originally in the Northeast, Northeast New Jersey, right outside of New York
Ah,
City. So was in a very hustling and bustling part of the country and the world. Really grew up right in the shadow of New York City.
so what made you find Purdue? Was it their engineering program?
Yeah. So going through school, and I kind of always what I'm now diagnosing as an engineering mind. Right. I always broke things and tried to fix them and
Ah,
tried to figure out how things worked and um, that led to a lot of appliances that may or may not have ever come back together that are
ah,
slightly not working. But uh, it that led to me trying to figure out what in that world I actually wanted to do. And I stumbled upon Chris Kraft, the first flight director's autobiography, Flight. Um, and that was really where I saw my skills and what I really like to do portrayed in a job. Um, while including things that I was just interested in, like space. Um, and that kind of set off the sequence of events of well, where can I go learn about what I need to learn to do this, and who has the history there. And I found myself junior year of high school out at Purdue at like a summer engineering thing, and learned more about it. And that's connection to NASA and their engineering program is how I found myself in the cornfields of Indiana for 5 years at Purdue and had a great time there.
that's fantastic. Back to your breaking things. So you started at a young age, and that's not atypical for a lot of engineers. How does it work? Disassemble, and put it back together and see how it works. And then when you found Purdue, was the NASA Pathways program part of that?
Yeah, so I knew a little bit about the Pathways program. I had done some research, but it also um, was a very different structured program back then. Each center kind of ran their own program, and there were rolling applications. There was no due date, and it very much was kind of a hope and a prayer. Um, and in fact, the way Purdue did it, because of the connection, they had some hard set interviews that JSC always gave um, to the students there, where the head of the college would pick basically a couple of students to allow them to interview. And in that, anyone who was kind of interested in the pathways or what was then called the co-op programs would relay their interests and their top five companies of whoever was there. And then if as the math worked out, the leadership in the college would actually and the School of Aerospace would assign those interviews. I did not get one of those.
You
Um,
didn't.
no, so I luckily had some family connections through friends and family of new people who were on site here, and I basically sent a cover letter and a resume and a manila envelope that got
Oh,
dropped on
nice.
someone's desk,
Old
and
school. Love it.
yeah, just happened to work out for me and got a call to do an interview.
But
And
that's the way, right? If you can't find one way, you find another. Your story is not unsimilar to so many of us that just knew we wanted to land at NASA, and there's many ways to do that.
yep,
So thank you to your friends and family who
yeah,
helped you.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very much a 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon thing that had like it was my mom's coworker who had a friend who worked at
Um,
JSC that like yeah, so it was I'm very thankful for the set of circumstances that allowed that to
I
happen,
love
and
it.
that in a stack of probably thousands of papers that it even got picked up.
Yes, but there's also something about just sheer determination and moxie that you're like, okay, look, there's going to be a way that I'm going to find to do this. It's just a matter of how I'm going to, where it's going to fall and how I'm going to find it. But you have to do your work. You know, you had
Yep.
to figure out who's there or who you know, who knows someone. And I love it. It's a classic case of networking and working hard. I mean, you have your degrees. So at Purdue, did they help once you had that connection and you were able to pursue it, did that change anything that you were studying at Purdue, or did it just enhance your work?
I think it enhanced, and from a couple of perspectives. So there's the major perspective was I really knew what I wanted to do. Right, I wanted to work in human spaceflight operations, um, and I looked at that from two perspectives. When I was here at JSC and I had these pathways tours, it was how much can I learn in human spaceflight, right? Like what, let me go look at every different avenue and build that perspective starting as a college student. And that included working in the engineering directorates to just get a full view of the world.
Mhm.
And then coming back to school, right, it was what technical information do I want to learn to bolster that? And then towards the end of my career in college, it was also, well, I know there are technical areas that maybe are not directly used day to day here, but are skills that I could learn that would be valuable, right? So I took a flight test class where we're flying airplanes and doing flight testing. That's not necessarily explicitly something we do here, but there's things you learn through doing that kind of work that then become applicable. So I kind of tailored my learning not to like major and minor concentration areas in aerospace, which is what I majored in, but really into where can I gain skills to help me going forward.
That's great. Oh, that's great. So when you were at Purdue, did you have some fun?
I did have some fun. I'm a huge sports person, so I was really big into
Good,
going to
good.
sporting events, and um, I still remember walking out of Mackey Arena basketball games where your ears are ringing and that cold air finally hits you after being packed in like sardines for two or
Sure.
3 hours. And yeah, I miss those days.
That's good. No, I ask because there's a lot of people who, when they find what they want to do, or they know, or they're so focused, it's a path that they pursue very passionately and they work very hard. And sometimes we forget to look up and have a moment or have some fun, or we're just so driven and we know where we want to get and we don't want to waste time and all these things. So I love when people also have the stories where they're like, oh, sure, I had this driven purpose and got to meet people along the way, have a little fun, do some things. And that's good because it's those kind of students and interns that make for good co-op and pathway students that go on to enhance NASA because it really carries all the way through. You get the candidates that are there to be driven as well, and they have a purpose and a goal. And it's fun to get the people as well who are like, sometimes this working at NASA, there's a lot of astronauts who are in a band.
Yeah.
And or there's a lot of astronauts who are athletes too, and some are very
Hmm.
competitive. So you get to see them out there having fun, doing their thing, whether it's running or, their sports or leisure activities. So it really is part of that well-rounded whole person. Did they encourage that at school as well when you were at Purdue? Like, go try another class that has nothing to do with aeronautical engineering?
I don't know if they explicitly, for lack of a better word, promoted that, right? But I think that there were opportunities that were afforded to you to go take if you were interested.
Oh,
And,
that's
and
good.
really, it was mostly just for me, and even now, right? It's an important life thing. I think when you work in an industry like ours, where it's 24/7, 365, high stress, right? You just need
Yes.
a mechanism for yourself to be able to relax and take your mind off of it. And you're from your time here at NASA, right? There's a little bit of a work hard, but hey, everyone's got to blow off some steam, right? So to be able
Sure.
to disconnect from that and have a celebration here and there, and to be able to enjoy what we've accomplished so far.
Yes, definitely. So, what are some of those things for you when you're not at NASA? Because my second half of this question, the reason why I'm asking, not so much the fun blow off parts and your hobbies and interests, But flight director, whew, that is a heavy job. There's a lot of multitasking. There's a lot, I mean, just like your degree at Purdue, you have to know a number of systems, engineering systems, the way things work and come together. And it can't just be this one lane that you're really proficient in, although I'm sure you are. So there's a lot going on with your work. It's really heavy. So when you're having fun, let's talk there first. What is it that makes you enjoy your time away from the heaviness of your work?
Yeah. Well, first, I think it's just you have to work to be able to do it, right? It's
Mm.
you know how we are, right? It's hard to just leave work at work, and things are always happening. So being able to turn that part of your brain off is a skill that you have to practice, and it's something that I won't say I'm proficient at
I
yet.
still haven't, and I've
Yeah,
left years ago.
yeah. Um, so just being mindful of it, right? And
Right.
whatever you're doing on the other side, spending time with friends and family, or just hanging out at home, or working out, or going to events, right? To be able to truly be there and know that someone else is worrying about those problems, and it's their job to at that point, so you don't necessarily have to.
That's true. Can you ever really take that breath and time away? Because even when you are, you're thinking about like, whoa, today's the day of the egress or
Yeah.
today is the docking. And so if you're not there, which is really hard for us when you're mission focused or, driven like that, and you know what's going on, and you just said it's in someone's hands, very capable, very, but you're still, are you ever really off? Your brain's just not.
Yeah, and that's why I say you have to work on it, right? Like, I
Yeah.
think it truly is something, a practice that, you have to work on. It helps if you go places where you just can't take any devices with you, and then
Oh, yeah.
it's kind of a additional step there where, like, well, I
Yeah.
can't check email or do anything, so it is what it is, and, we'll come back and
Yeah.
see how it went.
For me, it's swimming. You can't
Mm,
take anything with you in the pool.
yeah.
What's yours?
Um, I think it's just maybe not physically like swimming, right? But putting, like, well, for example, right, on the weekend, if I'm not working, I'm just gonna put my bag in the office, put my phone in the office, and sure, I may check the phone once or twice a day, but to know that, hey, if they really need me, I have my personal cell phone, and I'll get a call, but I can just go in the kitchen and cook dinner, and enjoy the evening, and
That's good.
take my mind off of it.
So here's the $1 million question. Do you have NASA TV on in the background or in the web?
I don't know.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
Okay. I know things have changed. I know
yeah,
the beautiful new website is really like full. Like
yeah,
everything you need is such a resource there. And so NASA TV is a little different. It's definitely evolved, excuse me.
yeah.
But I remember always having that on kind of just in the background and even today, like even around, just so that it's there, but that's never really leaving. So I'm very
Yeah.
happy that you're finding that balance.
Yeah, no, it's, I think for me, more than having like the NASA TV ticker tape, was just like, now that we, like, I mean, instant messaging and email is pretty ubiquitous, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
just like having the phone buzz, and looking at it and looking at it, if there's something like let's say I'm home and there's a spacewalk going on, right? You're going to get those near
Yeah.
constantly for 7 hours, and um, sometimes you just have to disconnect and, like I said,
Yeah.
practice, right? Of it's, I can step away from this, and
Yeah. Sleep, eat. You have
yeah,
to do
right,
those things.
exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that because as a flight director, and again, all the things that have to be managed and assisted by you. We just had a great guest. His episode's coming out, if it hasn't already, Corbett Herringer, who was in mission control as well. Do you know him?
I don't know him personally, but
Yeah.
I've heard of it.
So anyone I think who's ever been anywhere near, whether it's mission control actually in the seat or in some of the flight ready rooms that help support mission control, it is something I cannot wait to ask you where you have to, according to Corbett, you practice for the anomaly so that when it comes, you're like, it's just like anything else. It's like are you a parent? Do you have
I'm
any
not.
kiddos?
No, I do
When
not.
you do, it's like that first time the kid falls, and then the second time, but by the third and fourth and 20th and 120th, you're like, you good? Are you okay? We're good here because here's the process. And the first one takes your breath away. You're like, oh my gosh. And you have a visceral and physical reaction to, someone that could be, it could be very potentially dangerous or it could hurt them. And then you're like, wait, we've done this before. We've worked through this. Here's the process. My brain from my, inside out knows how to handle this anomaly. Is it like that?
Yeah, so I think there's different perspectives, and this is definitely one of them. So I will give you kind of what I'm thinking about and then give you some other perspectives. So um, it's definitely a different mindset, right? So I will, whenever I walk in to the control room, there's a little bit of healthy anxiety and tension, right? Because you're just running a little bit faster. Everything's thinking a little bit faster. You're kind of overclocking your brain.
Oof.
And that in and of itself is strenuous, but even if you're not consciously doing it, like we just do that.
Yeah.
Um, and then you have the rest of the team, right? And when we're talking about the International Space Station, I've at any time of day I may have from 20 people in the room to 6 people in the room, depending on what the crew's doing, what time of day it is, whether we're the planning shift and the crew's asleep. We might be down to the skeleton crew, and there's only 7 of us in that room. And some of those times are where we have the newest people in the room too, right? So yes, while everyone kind of has that, you see a bunch of messages or a message hit the board, and you know that there's tones going off on the station. Everyone kind of does that collective breath of okay, um, and then the reactions are different, right? And I think part of my job is also to meter those reactions of being able to be the loud voice in a quiet room and being able to be the quieting voice in a loud room, depending on what's going on and what the circumstances are. So we have an extraordinary training program here, and are at the point where I'll have a college student 2 years out of college, and this is what I was, right? Who we've trained, we've entrusted, and now they are entrusted with being technical experts of $150 billion spacecraft with 7 people aboard. And everyone knows that in the back of their head, which drives the response you're talking about, right? If we
Yeah.
train and hammer a lot of things in, and when we see those things, we kind of know how to respond to them. But also embedded in that is what do I do when I don't know what it is? And that's what sparks that bigger, all right, what's going on response. And that's where the training, right, gives you that response of, okay, something's happening. And then you kind of see this hump that everyone crosses over of, okay, all right, we know how to do this. Let's go work the problem. And that's definitely something that, especially in rooms and training when we're doing simulations, you can kind of see that progression and you can palpably feel the room kind of ebb and flow with how much energy or people are spending on problems and how they're reacting. And it's a very palpable, tangible thing.
And you rely on your team to bring you the answers and help you work it through.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you talked about technical expertise, and really, when I'm in that room, I am not a technical expert in anything, right? There's people who have hundreds of hours doing deep technical work in these systems that are my experts. And yes, I need to know enough to ask the right questions and to integrate the problems. And at the very end of the day, the real hard part of the job is when we're in gray space that we don't really understand, and there's new risk that we haven't talked about with all the stakeholders. I have to know enough to be able to accept that risk.
Yeah.
So the people in that room are the smartest people. And at 3 a.m., that person 2 years out of college that just got certified is my world most expert in that topic.
Which is also amazing.
Yeah.
You talked about, and you mentioned very early in our conversation, Chris Kraft.
Mm-hmm.
And him right away, when you were in school, you read his biography and this sparked you to completely start upon your path. What is it about him that speaks to you now that you're working right in the same, probably, maybe, possibly a chair or area? I know
Yeah.
mission control has evolved. And then of course there's for folks who have not, maybe a lot of people don't know this, and maybe you can help enlighten us. I think we've talked about it on the show a number of times, but there's our historic mission control where a lot of things happen, lots of milestones through history, and our moon landing and our first Apollo, Mercury, Gemini, and Saturn V mission control. And then we have our modern, and then we have one that was separate for the shuttle missions, and of course one just for space station. And Chris Kraft has walked us through a lot of that part of history and definitely inspired you. So what was it about this man that spoke to you?
Yeah, I mean, he is a visionary in human spaceflight, right? That some of the techniques and the way we think about problems and how we designated things as flight rules and talking about how things break and writing down what we think our answers would be to those and working those with the different programs before we fly. That was all their creation, right? That the genesis of how we do this still is rooted in how Chris and those early mission ops teams envisioned this to be. Um, and then as a leader going forward, right, of managing those things and working with the other giants in human spaceflight to get things like Apollo to fly. There's hundreds of stories, and just considering that, I think the testament of itself is that we do many of the structural things of how we talk about problems and how we document them the same way we did in the late 50s and early 60s is a testament to the rigor they put into that process and how they thought about it and how it's withstood the test of time.
Mm, what an honor. What a job that you have. Not to add more pressure, but here's another loaded question. Some of my favorite astronauts, Chris Hadfield and Mike Massimino, they always talk about when they speak to the news, and they're always great go-to representatives to talk to the news because they've been in just about every seat, they've flown just about every mission, and they say things like, we're not nervous because every anomaly has already been worked out on the ground, and they know that when they're sleeping and even when they're awake, you and the team are handling the problems that arise, and they know that you have their back. Can you talk about that relationship that you have with any crew? How you know them, how you get to know them through training, and even if you don't work directly with them, how you see them in the hallways. You're there at NASA and you're seeing them go through their training as well, and you get a bird's eye, very back inside look at what they struggle with their everyday. So on top of all your work as knowing all the systems and how things are actually staying in space, in orbit, you also have to help guide and navigate through the human component of their work and their challenges and their days. How is that not overwhelming, and how has that relationship been built so that you have that collective sigh of, we're going to do this together?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different now. Like I think when we had shuttle missions, and even now with commercial crew missions like the Dragon Cruise or with CFT, the leads for those missions are very close to those sets of 4 or 3 or 2 crew members. When we're just working through ISS, quiescent daily operations, I may not know every single crew member as well as every other crew member, right? Those relationships are relationships, they're personal. So be it, oh, they were my Capcom at this training event, or I know them from this thing, like it's built over time. We do try and um, be mindful of just continuing to build those relationships and setting up offsite meetings and socials and things with the offices, just so everyone knows faces and knows who they're talking to and has the level of trust you're talking about. I think a bit of that is just implicit too, right? If they know our job is to make sure that we're keeping them safe, and they also know that if we go away, they have been trained to be able to respond to the things that they would have to respond to quickly if they can't get a hold of us. And so that respect and expectation goes both ways. And I even recently, I was working close to one of the crew sleep periods and um, got a call about some scheduling thing from the crew, and they tailed off with "Thanks for watching over us," and that's something that kind of sits with all of us. If we know that that is what our job is, so the relationships are built over time, and that there's a bit of that expectation from all of us of we understand the responsibilities that both groups have and take those seriously.
Not only that, but people might not realize that when you're working and you're seeing this crew day in, day out, they're scheduling what their work is, that builds a rapport, obviously, in a relationship, even if you did or didn't train with them, perhaps. But you must be thinking to yourself, I'm getting to come in every day and go home and shower and sleep in my bed. And so when their mission is complete and you see them coming home, how can you not, as flight director? I mean, as most of us, most people at NASA feel like celebratory in their return, just because you're like, they're doing such hard work. Yes, our work is equally hard. Yes, we're managing a lot, we're working together, but you're seeing every day those same folks uh, not have a hot shower, not have a warm meal, not have Thanksgiving coming up, not have the things with, that we have the privilege here on Earth of just having that everyday advantage.
Yeah. So, and I'll say two things there. I think that um, we try and do a really hard job of making sure that everyone in that room is keeping the crew perspective of their problems and what they may be asking of. But sometimes it does come to the Capcom and our console to really say, hey, look, like we get that you want to do this task, but like the crew's been up for this many hours. They've had a hard week. Like, do we really need to do this now? Or can we send them off to the weekend early and pick this up next week? Right. So there's absolutely that thinking of the humans on the other side and making sure that we're doing our best to have them be optimally performing, but also be humans and have that time to themselves. And we make great leaps over time of ensuring that they can stay connected to their families and with video components and calls and all of that. You mentioned Thanksgiving, right? We try and do a really good job of making sure that we have cargo vehicles that show up at the right time so that there can be fresh fruit and food for Thanksgiving and things to come up for the holiday season, right? So I think that we have whole organizations that do amazing jobs of ensuring that we're making sure that the human piece of that is really accounted for, and that at the end of the day that all of us are also accounting for exactly what you talked about, right? Of
Yeah.
it can be it is a hard thing, right? It is expeditionary, and making sure that we can make that as much of a home as we can.
I'm so glad they have you to do that and to help them, really, truly, because the more you bring the humanity to their mission, the better maybe they can perform and relax and have that, feeling. So thank you. Who who helped you train, and how tough were they on you when you were going through training? I always hear these stories of like, who this was this was one that really made me question my decisions. Who was that for you?
Yeah, so I think that there was a lot of it. I think that there was a lot more of those realizations as a flight controller, right? Having different mentors
Yeah.
of in simulations, and at the end of those sims, just being like, "Hey, what were you thinking? Like, how did we get here?" Um,
Right?
I think by the time I got selected as a flight director and then training as a flight director, it is a little bit different, right? You have a sounding board. I had a mentor, and you work with them and you work out problems, but at the end of the day, it is also a very solitary job. And because of that, one of the things that I think is really important and that I tried to work on even before I got to this position was being introspective enough to figure out what I was doing wrong. And then once you kind of have that, then you go talk to someone of, hey, like I've been in this weird rut of this keeps happening and I can't get through these problems or I can't prioritize these things. And what are some techniques you've used to get through that? So that was, I guess, a different way of answering your question to say that I ended up becoming my toughest critic of even
Very
today,
humbling.
where I can't leave a training event. Most training events I leave, I don't think I've done a good job. And part of that's just because I'm a little bit of a crazy person, but then you sleep on it and you go figure out, well, okay, it actually wasn't that bad, but here are things that we can do better. And that's what I tell trainees whenever I'm in the sim, right? Is you will always find something you can do better. It might be tiny, but there is all, we are never perfect. And if you think you are perfect and you are completely comfortable in your seat, even in the real room, in the flight control room, you probably ought to look for something different because then you're starting to lose the edge.
A healthy perspective there. Healthy. And yes, your own critic, it sounds like, and you're always evolving and learning though, too, because
Yep.
I mean, how can you not be, especially in this role? Do you ever take work and your missions? and lessons learned from NASA and apply them everyday life outside of NASA, meaning the way your perspective, the way you can juggle so many systems and processes, or perhaps just like risk evaluation. And you're like, okay, I know percentages and I know what happens if these two things come together, and we're just not going to play that game. Is that true outside of NASA?
This is the taking the work home piece part, right? It's probably a double-edged sword because yeah, my brain is constantly what ifing, and sometimes you need to just stop because it's not healthy or it's going to make significant others or family members or friends just really upset when you start giving them answers and they don't want answers. So I think it is one of those things where you just kind of your brain becomes coded to think differently about problems, and sometimes that's helpful and sometimes you need to know when to not use it
So
because it's
hard though, right? I
yeah.
still live that way, and it was embedded in me from day one at NASA. And I can't, for example, let's just talk through a couple fun things. I I used to be late to events and meetings, and then at NASA, never. I mean, the problem at NASA though is it's back to back to back to back to back meetings. You can just meeting all day, right? But then after you leave, there's that, like I said, the safety risk. Like, how much are you willing to risk outside of in life? And I don't just mean like with mechanical things like your car and your everyday activities. I mean, how much do you want to risk relationships, or how much do you want to risk putting certain responsibilities in others' hands, like teachers and other people that are working to enhance and involve you in life. And it's hard for me. I don't know if this, I'm going to share here. You can tell me if I'm crazy. It's hard for me to be asked to participate in something without being, I can't step into that unless I've read all the documents, I'm in full 100%. And if you're even going to ask me just to like volunteer or show up at a meeting or just bring my 2 cents, well, I'm going to do all the background and all the research and reference so that if you ask me anything, I'm prepared, I'm ready to answer. I have an opinion, and this is what my NASA boss taught me, Dan Carpenter. Always be ready to give your boss or whoever's asking you an option as an answer. Don't just be like, I don't know, what do you think? Or like, I don't know, my opinion is based on my opinion. It was always like, if we answered this, here's the result. And if we answered that, which is also my opinion, here's how that plays out. I mean, this is NASA 101 that trained me, and I can't untrain it, Ronak. Is that yours as well?
So a little bit, but it's also in maybe not just in becoming a flight director, but just where I am in life. I think the counterpoint is time becomes really valuable, and that's really valuable in our daily lives in flight control. Right, I try and tell in every sim I work, I tell the trainees that don't forget that time is a consumable. We can't just sit about and think about problems forever because given infinite time, we will spend infinite time thinking about them. So I've just learned to let go of things too because I just need time of problems I tried to work myself or things I tried to fix myself around the house that I know I can just end up not being worth the time to be able to do that. Um, so that's kind of where I've gotten. I think I still do exactly what you're talking about. Of um, um, if there's things that end up being complicated in scheduling a vacation or planning a trip, right?
Yeah.
My brain will download to, all right, well, there are all the things you like. I'll give you an example. I was in Oshkosh a few weeks ago and I was
Oh,
landing on a Sunday here in Houston and I was working console on a Monday morning. So what was the first thing I did? I tried to switch those shifts and that ended up working out. So I was working Monday evening instead. And I still found a backup just in case I got stuck in Chicago because I was like, well, the last thing I want to do is scramble and then have
yes.
someone else have to figure that out in the morning. But I'm just going to cover my basis. And like you talked about earlier, right, is we thought about the problem for long enough that it ended up not happening. And that's
Yeah.
kind of the tact I took there.
It's also the NASA way to always have a backup. My kids
Yeah.
laugh at me all the time. They're like, Mom, we don't need that. It's not going to happen. I'm like, I can't not plan this. Like, if we're not going to do this, the backup's got to be here. Or simple stuff like, okay, but what happens if that doesn't work? And they're like, Mom, it's going to work. Like, there is going to be a cupcake sale. And I'm like, but what happens if it falls there? It's that NASA ingrained to always have that backup plan. And it serves you well more than it doesn't, to be honest, because if it just lets you sleep at night, you're like, well, there's a B plan just in case.
Yeah, I think where I've spent a lot of time working on it is just metering everything to be at the right level of crazy at the right times.
The right level of crazy. Now, did you fly into Oshkosh? Are you a pilot?
I am not a pilot. I flew commercially. It's something that I wanted to do. I didn't have the money to do it in college, and now I just don't have the time to do it. So
Right.
hopefully one day I'll be able to. But yeah, Oshkosh was awesome. I was lucky enough to go up there to speak at their Space Day event, and it was my first time in Wisconsin actually, and so the first
Oh,
time at the airfield up there in Oshkosh and the museum, and that was an awesome experience.
oh, so you
And
had great weather as
oh, it
well.
was beautiful. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was. Yeah,
Yeah.
highs of 75 and
I know.
got cool in the evenings, and
I'm telling
yeah,
you, you come visit us in the Midwest
yeah.
now, and we're going to visit you in February.
There we go. Yeah, yeah.
For sure. That's fantastic. And thank you for doing those things because, just like you were obviously influenced by Chris Kraft and others who and at Purdue, and a lot of people don't know where they can land a job like yours or a pathway like yours until they see you. That's certainly what happened for me. My parents took me, I was very young, and they took me to go see Jerry Linenger, who was an astronaut on Mir. You're shaking your head, yes. So he was one of the original, like, astronauts that when we were just starting our relationship to work together with Russia on the Mir. And then when I worked at, I'm sorry, I should back up. I'm getting ahead of myself, but it was at some Holiday Inn, and it was this speech that was like public. You could buy a ticket, and my parents took me because I guess I wanted to go. I was very young, and that was it. I was like, oh my gosh, all these things happened in space. There was a fire on a space station, and Jerry Linenger had to put it out, and there was smoke inside a station. Like this whole story blew my mind. And I thought, if this is how exciting space is, I want to be a part of it. But it was that spark. It was being able to connect and see from someone who had been there, done that, like you're doing now. And when you're traveling to Oshkosh and you're going back to Purdue, and congratulations on your recent 38. Is that correct? The 38
Yeah, yeah.
people that would
Yep. Yeah.
tell
Thank
us
you.
about that award. It's fantastic.
Yeah. So just to address your first point too. Yeah. I mean, like we're trying to do better about going out, and it's specifically our office too. If there's a lot of perspective and different stories that we'd love to tell, and we just obviously have a lot here, but we're trying to be more mindful of that and go out and speak at these events and do that outreach because of exactly what you said. Of there were kids there and families there that were asking amazing questions that obviously may not have been able to get the answers or questions, and not to toot my own horn, right, but given different speakers, right, could not have had that experience. So it was really awesome for me
I
to be
bet.
on the other side of that. Yeah, the Purdue thing was awesome too. So this was the 150th anniversary of the engineering college at Purdue. So as a part of their celebration of that, they announced a 38 by 38 award, which is based, the number seems weird, but is because Neil Armstrong was 38 years old when he landed on the moon. So that was kind of their impetus for that. And yeah, it was awesome to go back and uh, honored to get that award from them, and just speak to the other people who were part of the honorees, and the amazing work they're doing in all sorts of engineering fields. And it was a really cool event.
That's wonderful. Congratulations. Well,
Thank
as
you.
we get to hear your story, and again, we're so grateful here on Casual Space. This is what we do. We share the stories like yours. People always want to know, and you've highlighted how it's come through your work in Purdue. But what advice would you give to students just like you who, per se, have that goal or have a vision or have a clear understanding of where they want to go? And yours was not perhaps like you didn't check the box on the pathways and work it through that way. You found other ways. So, what advice would you give for students who are like, all right, that's not my way, but maybe this will be, or maybe I don't know someone who's at NASA currently. So, what are some other ways that I can pursue this?
Yeah, well, and I'll say I did end up getting a pathways job, and that was through those connections. So it and
I
part of that was just like not saying no, right? Just never giving up it, and it's not over until you've given your last drop. And
Yeah.
I think that is definitely a part of it. Of there, like you mentioned, there's hundreds of avenues, right? Be it through a contractor, and we really like at JSC, everyone works the same, right? We're all working together. We're trying to do the same thing. So there's a bunch of contract companies. There's a bunch of NASA internships that are not rotational. There's the Pathways programs. There's international space agencies. There's commercial space programs now, and all of these are team members in the enterprise of human spaceflight. And if that's where you want to add value or make your mark in the world, there is more places than ever before now to go find somewhere to do that. And it doesn't, obviously, we'd love for that to be NASA, but it doesn't have to be just NASA. And we're working with all sorts of countries and companies to go make the future of human spaceflight possible.
Thank
And,
you.
and then once you get there,
Yeah.
right, just do the work, right? I think that there is always stuff to do, and very often it is not glamorous, and it sits at the bottom of the shelf because no one else wants to finish it. And if you start doing enough of those things, that people start to notice that work is just getting done. And I think that that's how I was able to get into a lot of doors that I got into, was that I just did dirty work, and it just built a reputation that way.
Good advice. So what's next for you?
I just got here, so I'm happy to be here. I think um, every flight director I've talked to, either current or who's left the office and moved on, has said that this was the best job they've ever had.
Ah,
So I intend to keep this job for a while. And
right.
I mean, we've got a lot of exciting things coming, right? The International Space Station has had humans aboard it for 20 years, which is probably older than some of your listeners, right? If their
Yes.
entire lifetime has
Yes.
been a human in space.
That's right.
So seeing just constant operations on the International Station, to include what will end up being um, the end of life of the space station and handing over those low Earth orbit operations to commercial companies. And I think that end phase of space station is going to be just as exciting as the assembly of space station, and all the different and unique things we'll be able to do given that time frame. And then going further, right, we're working on the Artemis program, and returning humans back to the moon, and doing that sustainably, and to return and to live there and learn there, and to do that, to be able to go to Mars. The analogy I like to use is, like I mentioned, we've been on station for 20 years now, and I liken that to camping in your backyard. You're pretty close to home. You've got your supplies with you because you're camping, but if something happened, you could radio mom and dad, and they could send you new stuff, or you could come back into the house really quickly.
Mhm.
Setting up an infrastructure to go back to the moon and stay there, kind of how we've stayed in the station, right? Be it at the Gateway, a new station we're working on in lunar orbit, or on the surface for long periods of time. That's like going to the camp at a state park, where you're taking more things with you that you're going to need to stay for a bit longer. You're further from home. It's not as easy to come home, but if you had an emergency, you could figure out how to get home. If we're talking about going to Mars, it's like going backpacking in Yosemite. You're not going to have very much help. It's going to take you a long time, and you're going to have to carry everything you need. And each one of those steps becomes easier if we learn as much as we can at the waypoint before. And that's kind of the trajectory we're on with Artemis. And we won't necessarily speak to the details of all the missions, right? But that's kind of the strategy to learn and to build those technologies and our understanding of those places as we try and go further for longer.
Well, I'm really glad that you're at the helm and helping.
I'm happy to be here.
And it sounds like you're really good, Ronak, at taking it all in and knowing where you're sitting, and the power, but the privilege as well, and especially in following the footsteps of someone you admire as Chris Kraft. So you're perfectly positioned, and I'm really glad you're there.
Oh, it's humbling, right? And you say keeping perspective. I think it can be easy to get lost in it, right? So it just like all of us have sometimes you're just in meetings, you're every day, you're grinding a bunch of shifts, but then you're sitting there in the middle of the night and you look up and you're flying over the Bahamas and you're seeing these incredible views, and you just have to take that second to say, okay, this is pretty cool.
That's pretty
Like
cool.
this is pretty incredible. Um, so just taking those moments to do that, I think, is really important.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm sure everyone's really going to enjoy hearing from you and getting this episode so that you can inspire others to step into the pathway you've carved, and one that, although tough, is pretty darn incredible. So thank you so much for joining us. And if we have some questions from any of the listeners, can we send them to you there at NASA?
Yeah, sure. I've got a little bit of a social media presence. I'm sure I could talk to you. Um,
Great.
but yeah, I'm out there. You can find me.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Beth. I'm happy to be here and happy to talk to you.
All right. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.